I'm sure you're familiar with the song, The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia. Well, that pretty much happened last night under cover of darkness. Very, very, very bad thing happened here. I'm not talking about the tornadoes that ripped through the South. I'm talking about the Georgia legislature and our governor. A law that was signed, or a bill that was signed into law here in Georgia last night. This is... It's very difficult to process this, especially since I live here. You know, I've been talking for a long time about, and I don't know how, about Christian fascism and its attempt to overtake, destroy small d democracy in this country and replace it with a kind of theocratic bullshit that I don't think any of us wants, not even real Christians. By real Christians, I mean people who followed the message of Jesus of Nazareth, the rabbi. But I've been talking about this for years. And last night, a harbinger of what is to come in the rest of the country, unless we stop this, occurred. You can call it, like I said, the night the lights went on in Georgia. You know, Trump tried to overturn the election here in Georgia, and he failed. And now the Christian fascists in the Georgia General Assembly and the Christian fascist Brian Kemp, who is the governor, have made it easier to overturn elections, something Trump couldn't do. The opinion is it'll make what we all lived through in 2020 look like a day in a kindergarten. Ari Berman, writing at Mother Jones, he says, during the 2020 election cycle in Georgia, Donald Trump pressured Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to, quote, find 11,780 votes, quote, unquote, to overturn Joe Biden's victory here in Georgia. Now, we all at this point know about that because it got national attention, national headlines. And the orange bastards' efforts to manipulate and in the process destroy the electoral process failed here in Georgia because our Secretary of State, a Christian Republican, I'm not sure if he's a Christian fascist, not yet, although I have my questions about him. But the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, stood up to the orange bastard and defended the integrity of the election, the presidential election, and then subsequent to that, the two runoffs that brought Georgia two Democratic senators for the first time in a long time. And our Secretary of State, whose office up until last night oversees elections in Georgia, defended and praised the integrity of the election that occurred here in Georgia. But if the Georgia legislature has its way, and it appears it's going to, Republicans will have a much easier time overturning the will of voters in future elections. I mean, that sentence, do you hear what I'm saying? Republicans will have an easier time overturning the will of the voters in future elections here in Georgia. And this is a virus that is being pushed across the country by the Christian fascists. There are, 43 states that are considering these kinds of bills. I mean, we are watching in real time the destruction of the fundamentals of democracy in this country. Please pay attention to this. Now, what happened last night, or on Thursday, during the day, all of this happened in the space of a day. But it started yesterday. The Georgia House passed a major power grab on a party line vote that removed our Secretary of State as the chair and a voting member of the state election board. That board oversees the certification of elections and voting rules here in Georgia. And what the General Assembly did, the House of Representatives here in Georgia, instead of Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, being in charge of elections, the General Assembly would allow the Republican-controlled legislature to appoint a majority of the board's members, including the chairperson, which used to be the Secretary of State. The former election protection director of the Georgia Democratic Party on witnessing this said, quote, "This is extraordinarily dangerous when you're appointing the majority of the body that you're responsible to. It's self-dealing." Well, yeah, it's in court. It's worse than that. Director of the Georgia Democratic Party, much worse. This is what this shit has been leading up to for years, actually for decades. And Georgia, bless our hearts, Georgia becomes the spear point in this decision to kill democracy. So the state board that will be appointed by the Republican-controlled legislature would have extraordinary power now under this bill to take over county election boards that it views as underperforming. Can you give me a definition of underperforming? And this raises the real possibility that election officials appointed by and beholden to the heavily gerrymandered Republican legislature here in Georgia could take over election operations in Democratic strongholds like the city of Atlanta, Fulton County, where Trump and his allies put out these bullshit conspiracy theories about suitcases full of ballots being counted by election officials in November after Republican poll monitors had left. The head of Fair Fight Action, her name is Lauren Groh-Wargo. She was Stacey Abrams' campaign director, I believe, when Stacey Abrams ran for the governorship here. But Lauren said, quote, "It will make what we lived through in 2020 look like child's play," end quote. She said that in a call with reporters this week when it became apparent that the Georgia legislature was going to pass this destruction bill. Lauren went on to say, quote, "Donald Trump won't have to strong-arm our election administrators here. The most radical fringes of the Republican Party sitting in the state legislature will be able to wipe out boards of elections, challenge voters because they don't have the right name according to them, or they don't look the way that the Georgia legislatures think they should look. This is Jim Crow 2.0, end quote. I think it's a lot worse than that. I think this is a de-enfranchisement of black voters here in Georgia, and the rest of the country is watching what happens here, especially the states who are planning the same bullshit. Now, this power grab is similar to actions taken by Christian fascists in other states like Wisconsin, where the Christian fascist-controlled legislature in Wisconsin stripped power from the incoming Democratic governor, Tony Evers, after his election in 2018. Just took executive power away from the governor in Wisconsin. And similar efforts by these Christian fascist legislatures to take power away from secretaries of state and election officials are underway in at least 8 Republican-controlled states, or I should say Christian fascist-controlled states. The effort to take power away from the secretaries of state who have the power to determine election results, election conditions, voting days, all sorts of things. And this Georgia bill is also one of more than 250 bills being considered by Republicans, Christian fascists, in 43 states that will make it harder to vote for black folk. And it was passed here in Georgia one day after that filthy pig Mitch McConnell claimed in a Senate hearing that, quote, states are not engaging in efforts to suppress voters whatsoever, end quote. Oh my God. Do you see the difference between a Republican and a Christian fascist? It is apparent, right? Let's call Susan Collins a Republican. Let's call Mitt Romney a Republican. Let's call Mitch McConnell what he is, a Christian fascist. Jesus. And yesterday, President Biden called these voter suppression efforts un-American and sick. And he singled out this provision in what is now Georgia law that would make it illegal. I mean, I don't believe I'm saying this. Illegal to give water to people waiting to vote in the heat and the humidity here in Georgia. I'm telling you, in the summer, when we have elections, special elections in November, when we have primaries or the runoff elections in November, when we have general elections, it can be hot as hell here. It is now illegal to give water or food to people standing for 6 or 7 hours in line in the heat waiting to vote because the Georgia General Assembly has so screwed up the system here that in some instances in the non-white precincts, it will take that long to vote because they're removing voting machines, drop boxes, and the right to vote by mail. Biden said, quote, this is extraordinarily dangerous when you're appointing the majority of the body that you're responsible to. It's self-dealing, end quote. It's also criminal. It's also Christian fascism in its most glaring example. Look, I fully understand and acknowledge that my raging against phony Christians can piss off some of the people who otherwise listen to this podcast because they agree with most of what we talk about here. I know you may be a Christian, you may be a Catholic or a Protestant or some other denomination of Christianity. I am not talking about those people who are Christian Democrats. I'm talking about the Christian fascists. And those are the people who have stripped any and all of the meaning of anything in a moral or ethical or sense of human rights that Jesus of Nazareth ever said. The Christian fascists have kicked it into the gutter. They don't care. If their so-called Messiah, who would look at them and get ill, if he were to return or even show up for the first time, the Christian fascists would rip him to pieces. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.